1968, a year that brought the Navy a lot of action in many fields and a new First Sea Lord. On Trafalgar Day, he came to take the salute at the time-honoured Trafalgar Square Parade. Admiral Sir Michael Leffernew, who joined the Navy in 1927, went on to become a gunnery specialist, as well as one of the Navy's most popular and respected characters. No newcomer to Whitehall, he's already served there as Director General, Weapons and Radio, and again as Controller of the Navy. It was after 2 years as Commander-in-Chief Middle East, which included supervising the evacuation from Aden, that he took up his present appointment as Chief of Naval Staff and Professional Head of the Navy. Sir Michael started his new job in August 1968, and soon afterwards I went to see him for Scranbag in his 6th floor office at the Ministry of Defence in Whitehall.
Well, how very good of you to come along and see me.
Thank you for seeing me.
Not at all.
Well, First Sea Lord, how do you feel about occupying this chair? Was it a lifelong ambition?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I think life doesn't work like that. I think when you have one stripe, your ambition is to have two, such as you've got, and so on. I think that's the way it works out. I certainly never had a conscious ambition to this, all this jazz.
Well, now that you have all those rings, you seem to occupy two offices, the Chief of the Naval Staff and First Sea Lord. Does this mean, in fact, that you do two separate jobs?
No, not really. It's the titles. There are the two titles, as you've said. In fact, it's one job, but it does conveniently break up into two parts. On the First Sea Lord side, I need hardly say that I'm not a lord, and I don't go to sea as much as I should, or I'd like to. And the Naval Staff side is on the Whitehall side of the battle.
Do you approach your work in any very different way from your predecessor?
He had a rather different job than I will have. He had a period of cuts and slashes in the Navy. Now, I hope my job will, in fact, be somewhat different. I hope we've seen an end of these cuts, and that now we shall see the new Navy going forward on the course that my predecessor set, but I hope I shall be driving it along a more regular course.
Well, how do you hope to tackle this from the Whitehall side of the business?
Well, from the Whitehall side of it, my job as senior naval man in this building is to see that the government gets the best professional naval advice and give the best advice I can to the government from the Naval Staff machine. That's the Whitehall bit of it.
Well, these are tremendous preoccupations. Do you think that you're going to be able to get out of Whitehall at all?
Oh, Lord, yes. I should be terrified at the thought I had to stick around in this room for, it'd be like going to Siberia if I couldn't get out. No, I think that's very much part of the job. I hope to get around a good deal and talk to Jack and the officers, and, well, they must talk to me, actually. I don't have a particular message for them. I want to hear what they think and keep in touch with the grassroots. We must do that.
Well, now, you joined the Navy in 1927 when the picture was rather different. If you were a young man now, would you do the same?
And certainly, I'd be signing up on the dotted line like mad. But, of course, I'm not a young man. I joined when I was 13, which is a long time ago. But I would say that if a young chap came along to me, and they do, and their parents, and asked my advice, I say, well, if you want to join the Navy, give it a go. I can offer you, as the professional head of the Navy, I can offer you a jolly good life and career in the Navy, and a worthwhile one, but it's up to you whether you take it.
Well, I think you may very well meet people, as I have in the Navy, who are still very doubtful about the future. Can you reassure them in any way?
I think now we are finished with cuts. I hope that we are going forward with the new Navy. The new ships will be built and produced on time. There are various other progressive things that are happening all through the other Sea Lords departments for the Navy and ashore, and I hope those anxieties which you mentioned, and which are very reasonable ones, will be allayed.
Do you think there's anything in the suggestion that some people have made that the Navy is becoming simply a coastal force?
Ah, no, that's absolute nonsense. It really is. I mean, I know the thing, but there's no thought of the Navy becoming an auxiliary fire service. The Navy, the White Ensign, will be still seen not only in Europe, but around the world. This is bound to be so.
Well, you sound pretty optimistic one way and another, but if things don't work out as you hope they will, what are you going to do about it?
In this office, we are ready for anything now. If it doesn't work out, here we are. How's that?
I hope it won't come to that. Very good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now the way the Royal Navy shaped course for the future in 1968, as naval cameramen saw it all over the world. In January, sea trials for a mine layer that's something a bit extra. She can also act as a mine headquarters and support ship. HMS Abdeel was launched just 12 months before at Thornycroft, Southampton. 1968's first two launches were both Leander-class frigates. HMS Bacchante, named by Lady Twiss, wife of the second Sea Lord, went down the slipway at the Walker shipyard of Swan Hunter and Tyne shipbuilders. They've got 5 more Royal Navy ships on the way. Lady Hill Norton did the honours for the second Leander, HMS Charybdis, at Harland and Wolff's, Belfast. Equipped with Seacat, submarine mortar and her own helicopter, not to mention all mod con for the crew, she's got what it takes to play many effective roles all over the world. Early in 1968, the Navy answered a distress call from Sicily, struck by a terrible earthquake. British sailors from Malta were first to help and deserved recognition on the BBC's 24 Hours programme.
An Italian report this week showed that Italy has had more experience of major natural disasters than any other country in the world. Sicily, in particular, is known to be an earthquake area. Things got moving only because helpers decided to take the law into their own hands. In this case, it was 35 British sailors and 8 soldiers sent from Malta.
Hey! Up you go!
As the Navy got things going, all sorts of other organizations with tents moved in. Now there are over 3,000 people living here. An indication of their standard of living can be found behind the fear that typhoid may be the next disaster. To beat it, British sailors have been working round the clock. The cause of the fear is that many of these people are so backwards that they don't understand what cleanliness means. Often their destroyed homes had no lavatories. Instead, they just squatted where they could.
If the Matlows hadn't acted quickly, the squalor and suffering might have been even worse. In February, one of the year's most significant events. To the waters of Florida came HMS Resolution to carry out her first Polaris missile firings, one each for the port and starboard crews. Resolution submerged some 30 miles off Cape Kennedy to make final preparations. Then the missiles, each with a range of 2,500 miles, but equipped this time with electronic test gear in place of their deadly warheads, were fired to the target area way down the vast Atlantic missile test range. Both tests were completely successful. A fine achievement for Resolution's captains, Commander Henry and Commander Frewer, and their crews. Britain's first Polaris submarine was on top line for operational service. In March, Lady Law, wife of the Controller of the Navy, launched Britain's 4th Polaris submarine, Revenge, at Camel Laird's Birkenhead yard. 8,000 tons displacement, 425 feet long. That's the shape of a capital ship of the 70s. With her sister ships, Resolution, Renown and Repulse, Revenge will be joining an operational fleet that's really to be reckoned with. To Greenwich in March came one of the mainstays of the surface fleet, HMS London, flying the flag of Admiral Sir John Bush, C&C Western Fleet, paying his first official visit to the capital, though in fact he works nearby most days at the Northwood headquarters of this vast command, which covers the waters of the Western Hemisphere. HMS London was due to pay off at Portsmouth after the visit, and the traditional signs were in evidence when she left the Thames later. Something else worth watching at Chatham, when the commanding officer of another DLG, HMS Kent, said farewell to the ship en route for an Admiralty appointment and retirement later in the year. Meanwhile, he had one last command, a brewer's dray. A convivial send-off by courtesy of Whitbread's Brewery, and a nice way of saying cheers to Captain Bernard McIntyre. April the 9th, and an emergency call for divers of the home clearance diving team from HMS Vernon. The day before, a BOAC Boeing 707 Whiskey Echo had crashed at London Airport. Chief Petty Officer David Lardner and leading seaman Michael Lambert were among those who had to find and salvage one of the engines which had fallen into a gravel pit. Lambert soon located it 30 feet down in thick mud and nil visibility. Then Lardner attached lines and flotation bags, and the engine parts were hauled clear of the water with the help of Royal Engineers. As with the Irish Sea Viscount disaster, the investigation simply could not proceed without the skill of the Navy's divers. Men from Vernon went down very well later in the year when they gave full-dress demonstrations on a Meet the Navy cruise around the British Isles with HMS Upton of the 1st Mine Countermeasures Squadron. Children from local secondary schools found plenty to interest them when the ship visited Ullapool. It was look up and look lively at the Royal Naval Air Station Yeovilton in April when the first 3 Phantom Interceptor fighters for the Fleet Air Arm arrived from St. Louis, Missouri. The Navy is getting 24 of these magnificent 1,600-mile-an-hour aircraft. 12 of them will be based here at Yeovilton, and the others are to be embarked in HMS Ark Royal. After the first touchdown, a taste of naval hospitality from Captain Baldwin, HMS Heron's commanding officer, for the aircrew who had flown the Phantoms across the Atlantic. A toast to the future. And a sad farewell in May to the ship that never was, HMS Leviathan, which lay empty and unfinished in Portsmouth dockyard for 22 years. Leviathan was built as a light fleet carrier towards the end of World War II, but never completed. She's been on offer since 1961, but no one wanted her as a ship. Now she was on her way to a breaker's yard as scrap. Action for HMS Hermes, with the first ever landing on a carrier by a civil aircraft. One of the only civil aircraft, in fact, that could do it, the 10-seat Britain-Norman Islander. It was the perfect way to demonstrate to the world the Islander's ability to land in a very small space. And what's more, to get herself smartly out of trouble. When she did want to land, Britain-Norman's test pilot, Lieutenant Commander C.R. Nunes, RN retired, brought the Islander to a stop in under 200 feet. A publicity job well done. No need now for dull performance graphs to convince overseas buyers. It's enough to show them how the Islander made light of a medium-sized aircraft carrier. Even the Islander would shy away from the flight deck of the Engadine, a new Royal Fleet Auxiliary helicopter support ship. She's strictly for choppers. Engadine's designed to give deck experience to pilots, and she'll also serve as a floating base for airborne anti-submarine operations. A big month-long minesweeping operation in May, New Broom. A total of 66 NATO ships were engaged in tidying up a menacing relic of World War II, a huge British minefield laid off the Dutch and West German coasts. Now a safe channel was to be driven through it, and a lot of potentially dangerous old hardware was brought to light. Among the British ships were the minesweepers of the Royal Naval Reserve, giving Britain's spare-time sailors useful experience of the real thing. A big moment in June for Royal Marines based at Sembawang, Singapore, when His Royal Highness the Duke of Edinburgh presented new Queen's and regimental colours to 42 Commando. Some 1,500 guests were invited to the base to watch the floodlit ceremony and the march past which followed. Another royal occasion in the early summer nearer home. Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother arrived in the Royal Yacht Britannia to pay a visit to HMS Neptune, the Clyde submarine base at Faslane. Among the people presented to Her Majesty were representatives of the United States Navy based in Scotland. During the day, the Queen Mother went on a tour of the base and inspected the submarines of the 3rd and 10th Squadrons. She was escorted by Commander Kenneth Frewer on board HMS Resolution to meet members of her starboard crew. And then she was able to take a close look at the ship she'd named in September 1966 and to learn at first hand how Britain had been launched into the Polaris age off Cape Kennedy a few months before. The Royal Yacht was on show with a very varied fleet during sea days off the Isle of Wight in the summer. People of all sorts from all over the world came out on a day trip to watch the modern Navy in action. Something a soldier doesn't do every day. A Jack Stayed transfer to HMS Decoy for Prince Michael of Kent, serving with the 11th Hussars. Nothing like seeing how the other half lives. What he thought of this isn't recorded, but he must have been thrilled by the action that followed. The shape of things to come. The Royal Navy's been pioneering gas turbines for 20 years, and HMS Exmouth is the first major warship in the West to be powered entirely in this way. She's a great success, setting the future pattern for the Navy and creating a lot of interest abroad. The waters off Norway in midsummer and exercise Polar Express. While the commando carrier Bulwark refueled at sea from the Royal Fleet Auxiliary Almeida, there was a very interested audience, the crew of a Russian frigate of the Riga class. Exercise Polar Express is said to have taught NATO a lot of useful lessons about landing operations. Let's hope the Russians didn't learn quite so much. The elegant outline of the Royal Naval College, Greenwich. Towards the end of June, it was the setting for an unusually attractive occasion, the passing out parade for a new supply of talent for the Navy. Commodore M.A.J. Hennell was there to inspect the 16 Wren officer cadets receiving commissions halfway through their officer training course at Greenwich. Commodore Hennell was acting president of the college after the tragic death of Vice Admiral Sir Horace Lytton, and he congratulated the new officers on an exceptionally good-looking turnout. On parade further up the river during the Evening News Thames pageant were Whirlwind, Wessex and Wasp helicopters from Portland. In close formation, they went in really low and skipped neatly over 9 London bridges. A highly effective way of keeping the old flag flying. A more conventional view of Tower Bridge. It was a good place later in the summer to take a look at the latest thing in ocean survey ships. HMS Hydra, in the Pool of London with HMS Beagle and HMS Bulldog. The ships attracted the attention of 100 or so experts from all over the world in town for an International Surveyors Congress. A chance for them to see what the Royal Navy is doing in this key field of research and exploration. The annual assembly of the Western Fleet provided a fine opportunity for the outgoing First Sea Lord, Sir Barrel Beg, to take leave of the Navy at sea. HMS Bulwark was just one of 50 ships taking part in the assembly, and the farewell review was a spectacular occasion. So the Navy wishes goodbye and good luck to Sir Barrel Beg in his retirement, and offers congratulations on his appointment as Admiral of the Fleet and Governor of Gibraltar. Some people hang out in the strangest places. In case you don't recognize him, the character performing the aerial striptease is disc jockey Jimmy Savile, who chose this way to drop in at the Royal Naval Air Station Culdrose to open Air Day. He obviously got the wind up when he saw the girls looking him over, and by the time he got down to earth, Jimmy decided he'd be safer in trousers. A bright start by this fugitive from Radio 1 to a day that was greatly enjoyed by everybody, as always. There were big eats in plenty, hot dogs and hamburgers galore. And the children didn't seem to mind being pushed around by the POs. Even the Daleks stopped being sinister for a change and went around providing the BBC with a nice free commercial. TV cameras weren't the only ones at Portsmouth in July to record the happy end of Sir Alec Rose's lone round-the-world voyage in Lively Lady. There were hundreds of boats and thousands of people on South Sea Beach to welcome him home. There'd been 10 days of anxiety when he couldn't be found, but at last the minesweepers Lalliston and Letterston met Sir Alec off the Scillies to escort him up Channel and handed over a drop of something to celebrate with. A sailing ship of much older vintage, HMS Unicorn. Since 1872, she's been the Dundee headquarters of Day Division Royal Naval Reserve, and many distinguished visitors have come to see her. This Unicorn has the unique distinction of being the Navy's oldest ship afloat, but by 1968, the Navy decided she must go. As things turned out, it was a happy ending. In September, Prince Philip received the ship on behalf of the Unicorn Preservation Society from the Admiral Commanding Reserves. Rear Admiral Place also handed over an Admiralty cheque towards the upkeep of the ship. But most of the cash will have to be found by the group of generous citizens who are determined to keep the Unicorn afloat and ultimately hope to re-rig her as she was in the days of her prime. Some things don't change all that much. When the frigate Unicorn was launched in 1824, the final preparations must have looked much the same as they did for the launch of her most recent successor. The latest Leander went down the slipway at Devonport after being named by Mrs. Maurice Foley, wife of the former Parliamentary Under-Secretary to the Ministry of Defence. Scylla, of course, packs an infinitely greater punch than the old Unicorn for all her 46 guns. And who could have dreamt in the 1820s that one day Jack would do much of his most effective fighting under the sea? HMS Repulse, the second Polaris submarine to be built by the Vickers Group, commissioned in September at their Barrow Yard. She keeps alive another very ancient name. The first Repulse was launched almost 4 centuries ago. Now there's another powerful ship to carry the name Repulse into a challenging and uncertain future. September in Singapore, and a pleasant sequel to the presentation of new colours to 42 Commando earlier in the year. To mark the excellent performance of the Commando's pipe band on that occasion, and their fine record of service since their foundation in 1943, the Commandant General Royal Marines decided that a selected piper from the band should be known as the Commandant General's Piper. On this farewell visit to the Commando, General Sir Norman Taylor presented a ceremonial ski and do to the first piper to bear the title, Lance Corporal Anderson. Anderson said the award came as a complete surprise and that he was delighted to receive the honour. The ski and do will have to be passed on to his successor, but for the moment, it's something for Piper Anderson to show off with pride to other members of 42 Commando. Proud memories at Portsmouth, when the Navy's new ice patrol ship commissioned in October. Captain Peter Buchanan will be away from home a good deal. His ship, the converted Anita Dan, will spend most of her working life near the South Pole. For families and friends, it was hail and farewell. Endurance sailed for the Antarctic soon afterwards. In November, an urgent call for help from Portishead Radio was picked up by the patrol submarine Odin. The 13,000-ton tanker Spiros Lemos had broken her back 110 miles off Corunna, and Odin immediately altered course to search for survivors. She reached the scene on November the 3rd and picked up 10 men who'd been adrift for 2 days. Next day, a naval salvage team swam to the tanker to attach ropes to the after end. But eventually, the towing job was handed over to a Dutch tug, and Odin headed for Gibraltar with the badly shaken survivors. In November, too, another glimpse of the Navy's new look for the 70s, the Type 42 destroyer. The first of them is to be built by Vickers. She'll carry the new Anglo-French WG-13 twin-engine helicopter for anti-submarine work, as well as a main armament of Sea Dart guided missiles. Like Exmouth, she'll be entirely turbine-propelled. The spot of rapid propulsion on land took a naval team right across the world in the London to Sydney car rally. Commander Philip Stearns of HMS Raleigh, Captain Ian Lee Spalding, who has a Whitehall appointment, and the team leader, Captain Hans Hamilton of HMS Tyne, took time off to crew a BMC 1800. They didn't end up among the winners, but it was quite something to complete the course. To come 31st out of 98 starters was good going for these 3 sailors on safari. What might have been a tense diplomatic situation for the new First Sea Lord when 2 attractive Dutch wrens came to visit him in Whitehall. Second Officer Jamna Prinsen was handing over her job with NATO to Third Officer Yvonne Van Santen, and Sir Michael Lefanu had the curious job for an admiral of handing them both bouquets of violets. Sir Michael took the job happily in his stride. No doubt it was a pleasant change from politics and helped to make up for the shortage of female company in the corridors of power. It just goes to show how versatile an admiral must be these days. The London Hospital, Whitechapel, and a human gesture by HMS London. It was a big day for young patients in the hospital when a very realistic model of the Tower of London was brought into the children's ward, all the more so because it was edible. The £120 cake had been made for the ship's commissioning, when the Bishop of London had rightly suggested it would go down well with the children at the London Hospital. Tremendous care had gone into making the model correct in every detail, and every bit eatable. The perfect way to acquire a taste for history. Of course, this tower didn't last quite as long as the real thing, with so many eager hands and appetites waiting to get busy on it. But Chief Petty Officer Cook Vassallo, who was there with Commander Ducker, was quite happy to see his work demolished, although it took him 3 weeks to make in his spare time. It was sufficient reward to bring a little happiness to these unfortunate youngsters, who so obviously enjoyed it all. Chinese chefs were kept busy cooking something up for the politicians aboard HMS Fearless in October, when, with HMS Kent, she was ordered to Gibraltar to provide a setting for the latest round of talks with Mr. Ian Smith of Rhodesia. Mr. Smith lived in the Admiral's quarters on board Kent and came over to Fearless for the conference sessions. They were held in the assault ship's wardroom, which had been converted specially into a secure conference citadel. After the tough bargaining which marked the talks, both sides needed to make the most of every chance to relax. And the ship's crews did all they could to ease the strain for the participants. After all, it's no easy matter controlling the winds of change. The Navy's job was to extend an impartial welcome to everyone taking part in the talks. I wonder what George Thompson saw when he peered into the future. Of course, the Prime Minister's pipe had to face a certain amount of competition, but the Pusser's tobacco seemed to go down pretty well. At the end of the talks, both leaders were presented with ships' crests, ties and cap tallies. And Mr. Wilson made a point of breaking away from the wardroom to sample a pint of the best with the chiefs and POs of HMS Fearless. In his farewell speech to the ship's companies, Mr. Wilson said Fearless and Kent had done a difficult job superbly, and that even as a politician, words failed him when it came to describing the Navy's hospitality. Getting on for Christmas, and time once again for the folks at home to send messages to the lads with the fleet who wouldn't be home for the turkey and Christmas pudding.
This greeting, John, comes from your wife, Anne, and baby Ruth in Plymouth.
Hello, John. This is to wish you a happy Christmas from both Ruth and myself. We shall be thinking of...
Each year, relatives can go along to their nearest Curry's radio and TV shop or naval establishment and record a personal Christmas message. They're then made up into tapes by Wrens at HMS Collingwood and sent out to ships all over the world. Every year, celebrities come along to the Ministry of Defence to record a few words to give the scheme a send-off. This time, it was the turn of disc jockeys Ed Stewart and Tony Blackburn to get things swinging. A happy occasion that also gave the Navy's Director of Public Relations a chance to entertain the press.
Your loved ones, your friends, and even perhaps one or two of your enemies might be saying hello to your Christmas. What are you going to say, Tony?
Well, I'd like to say that it is a very lonely time on these ships at Christmas, and I hope that these messages will help you to feel a little bit more at home.
Yes, well, I'll think that.
I tell you what, I think we ought to shut up, Ed, and let all the relations get on with saying hello.
Well, I think we ought to shut up and sip our Admiralty sherry.
I will.
And Happy
Cheers.
Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Another occasion for celebration when HMS Renown, the first Polaris submarine to be built at Camel Laird's yard, commissioned at Birkenhead in November. Mrs. Healy, wife of the Minister of Defence, was escorted to the ceremony by Commander Heath, one of Renown's 2 commanding officers. He'll alternate as captain with Commander Kenneth Mills, keeping Renown at sea almost continuously on submerged patrol. Another major step towards making the whole Polaris fleet operational by 1970. Towards the end of the year, the end of an era at Singapore. The great naval dockyard was handed over to the Republic of Singapore. Mr. G.W. Reynolds of the Ministry of Defence represented Britain, Mr. Raja Rahman, Singapore. As the Far East Fleet Commander said, it could hardly be an occasion of rejoicing for the Navy. But all concerned were congratulated on the smoothness of the handover, and Mr. Reynolds forecast a bright future for the dockyard as a commercial concern. Five days to Christmas, and at Barrow-in-Furness, Britain's 4th nuclear fleet submarine was named HMS Churchill by Mrs. Christopher Soames, daughter of the great man. So 1968 came to an end, a year, as the First Sea Lord said, which saw the Navy settling on a steadier course for the future. A strong Navy, an efficient Navy, with brilliant new ships to serve Britain in the nuclear age. Let's take one more look at what happened last February, when Resolution's Polaris firings firmly established the Royal Navy on the world scene for another generation.